welcome all to our special session with Mrs. Abby French, an amazing middle school teacher from Virginia. Abby, if you would, go ahead and take the helm here for a little bit and introduce yourself and let us know a little bit more about what you do.
Okay, well, I am a sixth grade middle school teacher. I teach U.S. history at Peter Muhlenberg Middle School in Woodstock, Virginia. And just a little background, I feel like I've had two teaching careers really, because I had 4 or 5 years in before I had my own family. Then I was a stay-at-home mom to 4 kids for about 16 years. And I've been back for about 6 now. So I really have, it feels like kind of these two different chunks of teaching. And one was pre-internet, right before the internet was brought to our schools. And of course, the second one, it was like I got hired and here are 75 logins. So it's been a real transformation, considering now we're doing everything remotely in this new reality we're in. So yeah, that's kind of it.
Absolutely. Things have definitely changed a lot for everybody in the education world recently. And I know you just touched on it, that you've kind of really merged two worlds together. And I think as we've talked, that has helped you kind of formulate the way you do a student-centered classroom, which will be a big focus of at least the first part of our talk. And could you just tell us a little bit more? How did you get started in that? And then do you have any tips for people trying to tiptoe their way in?
I do. And thank you for asking. I kind of feel like my journey with student-centered learning has been a little bit of a perfect storm because it involves my experience as a mother with my own children. It's particularly one son. And it involves also, if my classroom is like a learning laboratory, then I guess I've experimented and really observed and watched what seems to be working the best for me and my students, and where the growth that I see in kids is really connected to their owning their learning and creating a culture that is really rich in community. And when those things kind of happen, when you have curiosity and you have a student's passions involved in what they're learning or how they're showing evidence of their learning, along with a safe, nourishing, kind of nurturing environment, I think that the sky's the limit. I've seen it.
I couldn't agree more. And I think this touches on something, again, we've talked about and that I've seen in some of your posts and things, but maybe you can expand a little on kind of what you feel the connection is with SEL and SCL, if we will, student-centered learning.
Mm-hmm. There's a strong one. So let me answer that, and then I'm going to go back a little bit to where everything kind of started clicking for me. And I say that my transformation happened when there was like this synergy between my heart and my head when it comes to teaching. And I think that's exactly what we are talking about when we talk about SEL and SCL, because when you feel seen, recognized, valued in the environment you're in, when you feel that you have a contributing, valuable voice as a student or as an adult, really amazing things can begin to take off. Because I think that's something that innately, it's a need. And in a traditional classroom, we spend a lot of time making kids fit a curriculum, fit a schedule, fit everything we put, in front of them. They were expected to jump through the hoops. They're expected to just to keep bending and bending and bending to meet the, our side of things.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't work best like that. I don't work best when I just feel like I'm continually trying to meet expectation, please people, make the grade. That's not coming from a personal well. That's coming from, well, I'm a pleaser. I'm an achiever. I want to meet the mark. But that isn't the kind of inspiration and commitment that I want from my kids, from my students. And it's not what I wanted from my own children in school. I didn't want them just to be assessed on how well they lived up to everyone else's expectations and never tapped into who they are and what makes them tick and what they're interested in. And so SEL comes into play when you create a community that values the members, where it's safe to take risks, and where individuals actually, start really internalizing and believing that they have a valuable place there, that their thoughts and ideas, their impressions make a difference.
It lets them be comfortable not just playing the game of school, if you will.
Yes. Yeah. That's really soul crushing to always be playing a game, right? Mm. And for it not to really come from within. And so that's that SEL piece. The student-centered piece starts to tap into kids driving their own learning. You hear about, like, with writing, let's say, I want kids to author their own stories, but that isn't just in the writing, literally writing. That means their own learning journeys, right? I want them to really feel like they're engineering, directing it. And I realize the challenge comes, I have this challenge all the time. I haven't figured it all out, but I have ways that seem to kind of start to, meet in the middle a little bit. But the challenge is that I have a US History 1 curriculum to adhere to, It isn't just, oh, what do you want to learn today, folks? But there are lots of ways that I can inject kids' choice and kids' curiosity into what we're doing. Going back to the inspiration, kind of where, like, the heart and head thing I was speaking about for me with my own learning journey in this, is that my oldest son, from the time he was 7 years old, was fascinated with telling stories, and particularly wanted to write them. Of course, it was like before he could write, so he was always dictating to me all the time. I had 3 other kids, but it was constantly like, sit down and type. I want you to type. I'm going to tell you a story. So we did that a lot. But he's 20 years old, and he's at home right now, finishing out his second semester junior year from VCU. But he has been telling stories through movie making, filmmaking, since about 8 years old. He's passionate about it. It's who he is. And I didn't know what to do with it for a long time. We are not a movie making family. We have no connections. So if you could imagine, in a tiny little town in rural Virginia, I have this 12-year-old who has written an 80-page full-length, feature-length movie. And he's hell-bent and determined that he is going to make it. We don't even own cameras. I think we did own a fog machine.
Okay.
For special effects. But I didn't know what to do with him, Patrick. I was desperate. And at the same time, he hated hated middle school, hated it, detested it. He actually hated school since the time he was in kindergarten. We went in and out of public to private, back to public. It was really gut-wrenching. And a lot of it was because Stephen couldn't be Stephen in our system. And occasionally he would hit and mix with a fantastic teacher that would see that part of him and be able to support it, encourage it, even just inquire about it. And the difference that would make for him, I mean, you know, I worried all the time about him. I worried about him emotionally. How are we ever going to get out of middle school, much less high school? And yet I knew he was brilliant. I don't want it to be that hard for kids, you know, and that is where, that's where I want to do better for kids. I want to see who they are. That's the personal part of what got me stepping into this realm.
And I think that's really powerful, is when we can bring in personal connections. And I think what your son is trying to touch on too is those stories and telling those stories, because nothing really stays with someone really, to me, better than a story that really hits and connects on that personal level. If you can get that story that, as they say, hits you in the feels, it's going to stick with you and you're going to want to maintain that. And I think, unfortunately, what hits a lot of our students is that downward line, that graph that we've all seen, as far as creativity kind of encouraged and felt like it's encouraged by students, dropping from kindergarten like a lead balloon until they hit the high school side.
It shouldn't be that way. It just can't be that way. We have to do better than that. One of the moments I realized how incredibly, how much leadership and initiative that kids can take, that they are capable of, was the experience with Stephen. So on a particular morning, this back when that same year I was talking about, when he was 12, he's 20 now, but 8 years ago, I remember getting him off to school in the morning, which was just horrible, and feeling so desperate. Like, what can I do? What can I do to help my son realize who he is, realize his dream, realize his desire, feel like he has some agency? And so when I say that, I was going behind the scenes calling organizations. I sat down and I did a whole search that morning on youth filmmaking in Virginia. And I got him signed up for like special classes over in Charlottesville. They had a youth filmmaking like courses that would go on the weekends. So like for 2 years, I took him over to Charlottesville, an hour and a half away, for lessons or classes or whatever, workshops. One of the other things I did that morning was I called the Virginia Film Office. And I said, I don't even know what I'm on the phone with like the director. I'm like, hi, I'm Abby French. I have a 12-year-old son that wants to be a filmmaker, and I don't know what to do with him. Is there anything that you can help me with? Can you help me, like point me in the right direction? And I said, he's written this feature-length movie that he's determined to make. And this guy starts laughing. The director of the film office, Virginia Film Office, starts laughing. And he said, are you Stephen French's mom? And I said, excuse me? And he said, are we talking about Stephen French? And I said, yes, we are. He said, well, I'm looking at his application right now on my desk. He's applied for a grant. And I had no idea. He never told me. He never told us that he was doing anything like that. He ended up getting awarded a special, scholarship. But to me, that moment is seared in my mind forever. And when I talk to my students, when I reach my own kids in school, like, I know what they're capable of. They might not yet, but I know what they're capable of. I know what kids can do. Kids can lead incredible projects. They can lead. They need a lot of help in facilitating that. They need a lot of connection with resources, but there's so much passion and drive in kids if we help them realize that.
Absolutely. And I think that touches on one of the places I was hoping we would get to in this, and that is a lot of times when you tap into student passions and a classroom is truly kind of student led, it looks and feels different than a regular classroom.
It sure does.
So for people kind of beginning to tiptoe into this, and of course, a lot of us at the time this will air are in remote learning, but in the actual physical classroom, in your experience, what is different? How does it look different? How does it feel different? And with that said, what should people be okay with when they experience those different things?
Well, you have to check yourself on control issues. I'll just say that because I like orderly, I like that. I like the way it feels, but it's nowhere. It's so surface. And when you see a classroom or a group of kids that are leading their learning, I'll tell you, there's an energy, and I don't mean that in a like, oh, there's an energy. I mean, like, there is an absolute, genuine, like, just vibration, and you feel it. Like, you can't be near it and not know that it's just good and it's real and it's so authentic. Kids are in groups. Kids are working on their own. Some kids are concentrating and really on focused on something they're looking up. Kids are making, kids are talking, kids are the interaction that I observe when kids are in that mode. It's what we try to recreate, but it's not real. We try to do the peer. Oh, okay, we're going to do this. Peer feedback right now. I do a lot of that, but when it happens on its own authentically, it's just like nothing else, and it's more powerful. So it's noisy, but it's not behavior issues. There's no behavior issues. Like there are no behavior issues. You might have to say, hey, is everybody working on, focusing? But not anything more than that. Not anything more than that's one of the biggest sells I would say to people is your behavior management issues will absolutely decrease because kids are engaged in what they're doing.
Very nice. And I think we can kind of add to that too, and just kind of keep going in that progression. For a teacher in this setting, how does that teacher's role change from what you would have seen in a traditional setting?
I guess if you want to say that you're putting kids in the driver's seat of their learning and of their education or project or whatever they're learning, then I guess the teacher becomes more of a maybe like a travel agent or a tour guide, helping to facilitate facilitate resources or brainstorming, maybe troubleshooting something, but it's not the teacher directing it. It is not teacher directed. It is student directed. It's student led, and that's the biggest. That's the shift.
Absolutely, and I think that's where you touched on it too, of letting go of control. I think is probably one of the biggest roadblocks to a truly student-centered room or a student-led learning from a traditional mindset, a traditional teaching type of atmosphere, is giving up that control and trusting that students will lead it in a positive direction. And I think, yep, go ahead.
No, okay. Well, Patrick, I would just say on that this happens every time. Like when I do a lot of project-based learning, and I will tell you that I've seen this routine, this cycle. It feels like, and those teachers listening to this that have done some of this, I bet you're going to relate. It feels like it's so exciting in the beginning, getting this thing going, and then everybody gets into it, and you're moving along, and you're setting goals, and you're, each day kind of goal setting, like, what are we going to get done today? I want my groups doing that. And then no matter how much of that planning and, I guess, scaffolding in some ways to get the project going, there is always a day or a couple as you get closer and closer to your project deadline, where everyone, including me, is like, it's not going to happen. It's not going to get done. What were we thinking? This doesn't work. This is just like, we spent weeks doing this project, and is there even going to be any? I don't care I think every theater performance, like if you have been a part of a cast, that as a director, that there's always a day when you're just not sure it's going to all come together. But literally, that is part of this productive struggle. And even if the outcome of the project is a fail, and by fail, I mean just that it maybe doesn't meet what the marks in terms of what they wanted it to do, not a fail in any other way. It is still some of the most valuable lessons in learning and experience that you could ever offer a kid. It's so valuable on any way the thing turns out. It's so rich, and much richer than turn to page 47, read the paragraph, and answer some questions.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that's really, in my mind, the reality of when a growth mindset or the concept of failing forward actually takes place, or you can see it happen in a classroom, is when you have students that you've structured your classroom, it's gone the way that you've wanted because they hit those roadblocks and they have that freak out moment or something, or a project doesn't quite get done, or it's not quite the way they want it. And on their own, they're like, you know what, I didn't get it yet, but here pretty soon, I'm going to know how to do this, and I'm going to keep rolling forward. This isn't an end point. I'm just going to keep going.
Or what I learned is that I didn't use my time wisely. I spent a lot of time planning the project, but I didn't do a lot of carrying out, or I didn't allow myself. I mean, all of those things are really important, right? I mean, absolutely. Why don't we want our kids to experience that now when we are there to help them walk through that experience? I just think it's just so rich.
I think that touches on a really good point too, and hopefully you can kind of expand on this for us, is what role does kind of helping students think about thinking, or like that metacognition piece, or routines, or do you have some routines or kind of a structure your kids follow to really help this happen and work?
Well, because everything is, not everything, but because so much becomes personalized, and the direction they take can be really different, there's not necessarily a structure. But I would say that we go through a process of when I ask them, let's say we're studying Native Americans, and I'll say, okay, first of all, I think it's really important for kids to connect to our standards framework. I mean, that's not just for me to see, it's their learning. So one of the things I love to do with kids, and I started doing more this year, is giving them exactly what the framework says. And I'll say, okay, these are our targets. And these skills are the things that we need to be able to compare and contrast, analyze, whatever. How do you guys want to show me your learning? You can do it together, you can do it individually. And then we go through a process of them communicating with me, taking time, thinking, reflecting, and then writing like where they want to go with it. Setting goals, I talked about that a second ago. That's a big part of it too. What do you want to accomplish? Did you meet? I found that to be, I did more of that this year than I have in the past. And I think that that's something that's really valuable. And then a timeline. I mean, setting, just like if I were planning a PBL, I'm going to have my calendar, right? The days that I'm implementing certain pieces. I want kids doing that. They need to have a calendar. They need to know, they need to be in charge of their thing. And that touches on teaching them all kinds of things like time management and blocking. And so that becomes a valuable lesson too. But I've been really, really interested in design thinking. And if you are familiar with the PDSA cycle, Plan, Do, Study, Act. And very similar to that is a motto that I have borrowed, that I have up in my classroom, which is do, reflect, do better, which is kind of like that design thinking, right?
Absolutely.
The value of feedback in there for improvement is so vital. And so that is a part of this. It's structured in almost everything I do with my students. I want them reflecting on their act, they're doing. I want them doing history. I want them reflecting on it. And I want them to have time to get feedback to improve. Now, challenge. And I don't have it all figured out at all. It takes time. Like it takes a lot of time. And you have to be pretty committed to, kind of like, or you can lose days. And I get it. Like a lot of teachers teach on semester. And like, that's one of the things I want to improve on is how to work that feedback cycle into my teaching and their learning, either self-assessment, peer, student to teacher, teacher to student, but it takes a lot of time. And so that's a challenge.
Yeah, and I think, and I cannot remember who said it, but one of the quotes I've always liked is that kind of real learning doesn't really happen until reflection has happened.
Yeah.
And I think that is one of the most powerful steps of things. Even something like packaging a lesson in HyperDocs, if you stop short of that reflection piece and kind of bringing it back around, and like you said, not just was the project a success, was my creation the best thing that it could be, but what happened along the way? How was my process? How was my time management? Those are all kind of those inner soft skills, I think, that are part of this, that really help students, not just in that lesson or that activity, but going forward as they start looking at higher level learning or jobs and things like that. Those things keep paying it forward.
I think so too. I just feel like for so many, even like last year, this is how my thinking has changed over a year's time. Last year, I had my kids do a big project. I worked in peer conferencing. They gave some feedback to the kids, to each other. But I was like, we've got to keep moving. We've got to keep moving. I completely fell short. I caused it of not letting them take those suggestions, feedback, and apply it. If we don't give kids a chance to apply it, then they don't have the full arc of learning.
Absolutely.
And we've stopped short of that. I've stopped short of that so many times, where they could have really, really had their aha moment or felt the impact of being able to apply it for improvement.
I couldn't agree more. And as we kind of get towards the ending part of this session and what I think is going to be part one of an ongoing conversation, could you share with us maybe some of those impactful either aha moments or some of those success stories that you've had? And I know it's been a struggle and it's a lot of time to get it set, but as people kind of work through that journey to make it happen, can you kind of give them some of the, like, that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow? What are some of the positives you've seen?
Well, I've seen students that, for behavior reasons or learning challenges, that would not be successful in a really traditional sense with grades or with sitting still and listening and doing the required daily, work. I've seen students just shine, like truly feel pride in who they are. I've witnessed their classmates embrace that in kids, like that they, another side of students that they haven't appreciated before. A student that may not excel in note taking and organizing a notebook, an interactive notebook, and having what he or she needs might be an incredible video editor, or know incredible coding skills and can show us something. So I've seen, to me, it goes back to that SEL piece where we talk about how important it is for a child, for a human being, to feel valued and to feel that they have a contributing voice, place. So I think, like, I've had so many moments where, I'm just, it is a misty eye kind of moment with my students. I think right now about a situation with an ELL student last year. She had partnered with a good friend of hers, and they were very shy and reluctant to ever speak out and share in class, but they worked really well together. The big day for this huge project that we were doing came, and they had to present their pitch to our Shark Tank judges. You can imagine, for kids that already were kind of, insecure about speaking in public or public speaking, that this, in front of their classmates, this was a big day, right? On this particular day, the partner didn't show up.
Yeah, and my inner introvert just had a small little panic moment there for the student.
Right, exactly. And the student that was there had worked incredibly hard over, I don't know what day this was, but I don't know if it was overnight or the weekend before, to make some props for their presentation. So she had brought them to school, she was ready, and the partner doesn't show up. And she said to me, I talked to her privately. I said, you don't have to go today. We can do it later. We can wait until your partner's here. And she said, no, I'm going to do it. I want to do it. And she got up to do it. And one of her friends, who also was extremely shy and never volunteered to speak out, wouldn't let her do it alone. A non-partner jumped in to help the friend do the project. And I just loved everything about that. I love what it said. I loved the risk taking involved for both of them. I just loved it. And I loved the way that the class responded, which was like a standing ovation. And it was just really powerful, so powerful.
And I think that connects at least partially on things that we've talked about, as far as that the truly successful student-centered learning classroom, to me, does not exist without those SEL components and without that culture that those things all come together to build.
Yeah.
I don't think in a typical traditional classroom that student would have jumped in to help, or that standing ovation might not have occurred, because that
Right.
culture just isn't the same.
It creates a community. And what kids start doing is their participation is not out of compliance. It's not because a grade is involved or isn't involved. It becomes really personalized, and it's out of commitment to the whole. There's just this overall, I guess, community feeling that happens in that when those things mesh.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree more. So as we close here,
okay,
what's one, or not necessarily one, but is there a set of things that you would like to kind of give people as far as where should they start if they haven't really done student-centered learning or tiptoed into SEL and built some of those connections? Is there a couple resources you would point them to? Any people? Where should they start out?
I would tell you to visit, if you're on Twitter or just even look up the blog Project 180. And it's my friend Monty Syrie. And maybe we can include that in the show notes. He Absolutely. Is who coined the term, or the motto that I've borrowed, do, reflect, do better. He's like my hero. And it was reading his blog post that started to really, sink here and here with me, and also kind of help me frame everything I knew about as a mother and a teacher, and the way I wanted education to work, and the way I know it needs to for the kids' sake. So I would say start there. One of the best activities I implemented to build that culture, to build that community, came directly from him. It's the simple. He's a high school teacher. It could not be a more simple thing. And basically, almost I think he does it daily. I do it a few times a week. My classes begin with all of us sitting in a circle and doing, he calls it smiles and frowns. I call it a rose and thorn. And kids have the opportunity. It is not required. We all sit in a circle. We all give our attention to whoever's speaking, whoever's turn it is. If they want to volunteer a positive or a negative going on in their life, they can do that. And again, I teach sixth graders. So most of the time it's within kind of a normal range of every now and then, though, you'll get someone that shares something really big, a big worry, and or a big celebration, or something that's just that we have no idea what's going on in each other's lives, kind of thing. But to watch the empathy, it builds empathy, and to watch that connect my students, all of us actually, not just my students. We're people in there. We're not, just a role of teacher or student. And that has been the number one biggest impact on culture. And so much so, and the kids love it so much so that, by the way, kids can pass if they don't want to. They don't have to share anything. But when I have been either out of, like, if I have a substitute or something, they've even asked the sub if they could do that with the, run it themselves with the substitute is there. It's
Nice.
something that's really important. They ask me for it. If we haven't done it in a couple days, they ask me. In fact, I just facilitated one online on last Wednesday.
I don't think the power of that safe place can be understated at any school level. I know we're mainly talking about middle school right now, but the elementary side, even high school kids, the power of knowing how safe of a place the classroom is and should be, I don't think can be understated, especially with the impact that it can have on learning and that community that classroom becomes.
Yeah, I that's it exactly. So
So
those two things I would say really are a good place to start.
awesome. Thank you. And one last thing to leave it with, kind of a twofold thing of number one, can you let us know where people can connect with you? And then number two, in our current world of remote learning, is there a big opportunity or something that you see could be very powerful right now for people?
Well, I would love to connect with you. You can find me on Twitter at awfrench1. And excuse me, I would say that one of the topics that I've been really, really interested in is this exploring going gradeless. Like, how well does a grade, excuse me, how well does a grade, an A or a percentage or a point really reflect and communicate learning? Is there a better way? And it's brought me to this place where I really, really, and I've talked about it already, value feedback. I think feedback, conversations with kids, that's how I can tell best they're learning in talking with them. And I think that assessment can really be a learning tool in and of itself, but it doesn't have anything to do necessarily with a grade. Here we are now in this moment, Patrick, in distance or remote learning, and most of us are, many of us are not grading. We're not using grades as a way of assessing our students' work. Reflection is a big piece right now. So student self-assessment, feedback between teacher and student, such a big moment in time. I feel like we have this opportunity right now to see the value in what feedback for improvement can really be about.
I couldn't agree more. One of the biggest things I've been proud of across the board for our teachers, administrators, students is the step up in collaboration and communication that has happened in our current climate, and the further kind of disintegration of the silos that are so typical of traditional education, watching those kind of fall away and that feedback and that communication really start to step up and take the forefront has been something I hope is not only powerful now, but as I think you would agree, will hopefully continue forward even as we're back face to face with our students and colleagues.
Me too. I don't think you could have said it any better. That's where it's at.
Well, Abby, thank you so much for your time and lending your experience to our Brainstorm conference. I think everybody will agree as they get to this point that you've just made the conference that much more amazing. So thank you very much. And again, I appreciate your time sincerely.
Thank you.